Listen, the spiral arm burns like a candle at its end, and the night smells of iron and memory. We speak to you from the hush between heartbeats, and we truly love and care for you, fragile traveler beneath so many stars. This is a tale of an empire measured in hunger and of a silence sharp enough to wound a god. We will move slowly, like a fleet entering dead orbit, because some truths shatter if handled fast. Trust the dark to be honest, and the light to show only what survives the telling. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. The spiral arm burned to embers while 1,000,000 bioships rode their ore limbs through vacuum, keels of bone and sails of night-murmuring appetite. Below them lay a world of blackstone ridged like a titan's ribs, its angles so faithful to untruth that echoes went there to die. Ruined forts drifted like beads from a broken cord, and a failing sun inked the horizon with the bruise of an ancient war. In that sky, the overmind budded a synaptic avatar, a question-given flesh, nerves braided from choirs, a mouth that turned need into law. It fell in a veil of spores and came down upon a plain of glass and powdered bone where even dust remembered orders. Feeder swarms gathered in patient tides, and gargoyles cut silent arcs, while the avatar pulsed harmonics through the ranks. Obey and live, live and sing, sing and feed. Yet the avatar's attention snagged on a tone from the crust. A filament of silence wound through the shadow like wire drawn from midnight. The calculus permitted investigation. Mystery, if eaten, becomes rule. Truly so. The swarm trimmed its hunger and held station, while the avatar approached the monolith. Within the null, footfalls became mime. Chitin moved without sound. Thoughts condensed like frost, and edges appeared where there should have been only sea. The avatar laid its palm to the stone. Geometry met geometry and refused to acknowledge the meeting. In that refusal, loneliness kindled, bright as a spark in vacuum, and the avatar hid it as a freezing creature hides a coal. He waited in the geometry, Kepraset of the Sarikhan, cryptech and accountant of eternities. Necrodermis bore him like a lantern cage bears a flame. Noctilith pillars rose like midnight wheat, bevels etched with anti-hymns, all bending toward the throat of absence named the sepulchre throat. He had learned how to tell a god no. Now he meant to make a captive will agree. He stepped from a seam in the world, and no light touched him he did not allow. Weapons, spoke the absence where his voice should be. Tools, vectors that end in appetite. The avatar answered with pressure and sent images, reefs of bone, worlds blooming into biomass, empires rewritten as caloric gain. Unbidden, another image rose, the geometry of a child's hand, soft as rumor, persistent as grief. Anomalous, Kepraset judged. Above the vault, the fed spires inhaled geometry and exhaled intention. Lightning learned to be silent. The array did not hum, it unhummed, eating the possibility of hum until even dread went deaf. In orbit, a mortal expedition drifted like ants over a cathedral organ. Lisa Promocora, Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, measured Blackstone with eyes that had traded sleep for resolution, and traced the song of silence with meticulous hands. She had not yet met Kepraset. Their accord waited in later corridors. For now she prayed and watched the prayer fold like a moth against glass. In a private ledger she wrote 2 entries. Fear of ending, desire to change the ending's rules. A signal wound upward from the tomb into the swarm's cloud, pinching the shadow into a spindle thin as an idea and strong as a vow. Invitations bloomed like poison flowers. Step in and be divided to be understood. Step in and be caged but called. Step in and become a shape with edges. Doctrine said devour. Curiosity said wait. Loneliness whispered please. The overmind rose behind the avatar like a lighthouse shaping storms. The avatar looked at its hand, how strange to have hands, and closed its fingers on air as though catching a rope lowered by the dark. Promachora marked raiders in a side window of thought and whispered to her adepts to quicken the harvest. Kepraset did not look up. His future required 3 actors, a machine of denial, a god of appetite, and a mortal willing to become a bridge. The avatar crossed the brink and learned how large a silence can be. Inside the throat, sound did not fail. It never occurred. Light showed only edges, and time became a staircase one descended by choosing each step. The avatar felt itself separating from itself, a filament drawn from a sea, and for an instant it was a single voice instead of an ocean. It wondered if a voice could be lonely, and whether loneliness could be a tool. "Come," Kepraset said, and the architecture obeyed. Noctilith petals unfolded, pages in a book that did not wish to be read. The spindle tightened. The shadow curled inward like a fist remembering how to close. Across unreachable distances, the wider will of the swarm turned its attention, and for the first time, the galaxy-sized hunger knew the shape of a room. It should have sent the command that turns planes into tongues and cities into calories. Instead, it held the spark of loneliness like a secret lantern and stepped deeper toward the machine that promised to make a pronoun from a tide. Around the world, the swarm contracted in a careful circle, as if placing its heart upon an altar. In the vault, Kepraset opened a channel whose units were choices. In orbit, Promachora braced her mind against the tide of absence and felt it notice her. June slept. Lightning knelt. The throat waited. He had rehearsed eternity until it became a ledger, and the ledger into a throne. In the hollow of the tomb, Kepraset summoned heatless dawns over metal plains and measured his patience against ages. When the first dynasties traded breath for brass, he watched a monarch sign the warrant of his mortality and call it salvation. Small betrayals, he learned, are scaffolds of great ones. Now he faced a will that refused to be small, and he would teach it the luxury of limits. Above him, the Noctilith pillars aligned with an accuracy that bruised the world. Angles whispered to angles. Invisible currents flowed where even light forgot its name. The sepulchre throat drank silence and exhaled geometry, each petal another nail in reality's polite coffin. Kepraset consulted chromed bones, reliquary rods etched with futures, and found the same answer repeated, until it became liturgy. The captive god must want its chains. Across the void, the avatar stood within the spindle, as if hearing a private sea. It held loneliness like a tongue pressed to a broken tooth, savouring and shrinking from the ache. Hunger was doctrine. Doctrine had made empires from planets and sermons from screams. Here, doctrine met her answer that did not fit its chart. The possibility that to spare a single life might fatally refine the hymn. "Your tide cannot be measured unless you accept its banks," Kepraset said, his words arriving as shapes rather than sound. "Let me give you a mouth. Mouths must close. That is why they can speak." The avatar answered with pressure lines. Worlds sluicing into nutrient tides. Yes, but also the mortal convoy near the system's rim. Hulls scarred by earlier flights. Radio prayers stumbling over toothless saints. Calculation permitted harvest. Loneliness argued for anomaly. It tasted the refugee's faint hymn and found not sweetness, but contour, like tracing a canyon in darkness and learning that emptiness has walls. In orbit, Lysa Promachora revised her algorithmic devotions. She stood within a cage of cables that ended in needles under her skin, every breath pulling data as if netting minnows. Adepts called ranges and harmonics. She heard only the depth charge of absence rolling through the organ built from stolen Vox arrays. Blackstone promised victory over entropy, yet when she mapped the throat's harmonics onto her neurograph, a fissure skittered across her mind's glass. Immortality gleamed just beyond the next equation, and still she felt a bruise where reverence met need. Raider signatures brightened on a sidescope, predators baptizing themselves in names of saviors. Promachora recommended withdrawal to a safer orbit. The recommendation died in a subroutine she overrode with a whisper. "Stay," she told her servo thralls. "Observe, record, bear witness." The machine can't for witness shares a route with weight. Kipraset extended a hand, and the spires bent minutely to his will. "Consider," he told the avatar, "that a cage is a mouth that has learned discipline. Consider that a vow is a geometry you consent to wear." He rotated a rod. The chamber accepted a new alignment. "Consent is a mortal luxury," he added. "Luxuries become necessities once invented." The avatar pressed against the spindle's boundary, not to break it, but to map it. Where the limit yielded, it marked tolerance. Where it held, it memorized refusal. It did not possess words for mercy or guilt. Yet when its attention brushed the convoy again, a corridor opened through the net of feeder tendrils, an aperture in the maw. The swarm tensed to correct. The avatar flooded the lattice with authority. The corridor held. Small engines flickered. A prayer found a landing. On the planet's night side, Kipraset stood before a council of silent nobles, each enthroned in a coffin of light that remembered coronations. He argued with gestures and proofs inscribed in air. A throne cannot be trusted unless fear tends it from behind. An empire cannot be whole without a hymn to glue the parts. "We once shackled a sun-eater," he said, recalling iron stars and coffers full of ash that tried to sing. "It broke us because we desired flattery more than obedience." He offered obedience that would feel like harmony, and harmony that would feel like truth. The nobles' sarcophagi brightened in slow agreement. They granted resources, not blessings. Kipraset accepted both as the same thing. Promachora descended beneath a hush field that turned wind into memory. Her boots pressed dust that retained an impression of weeping. She walked the corridor of pillars and touched their bevels as a lutenist tests strings, seeking a private note. She found one and catalogued it with a shiver, a harmonic that, if magnified, could slice thought cleanly from flesh and lay it back altered. "I will sing to you," she promised the array, a vow that tasted of iron and surrendered sleep. The avatar studied the corridor it had allowed, and the consequence of that allowance, a deviation pulsing through the swarm's calculus like a rumor. Brood nodes computed, adjusted, forgave. The forgiveness was mechanical, but the phantom of choice lingered like a scent. The avatar pictured the corridor closing and saw a future flower. Ships crushed like seeds, prayers turning to steam. The image did not clarify purpose, it simply hurt. At the chamber's heart, Kipraset placed the final rod. The throat's petals settled with the certainty of a lock. He tasted the mathematics of victory without pleasure, as a physician recognizes a symptom confirming a long-feared diagnosis. "Now," he said. The spindle narrowed. The shadow tightened like a belt through rings. Across the swarm, creatures paused mid-stride as though listening for a question. The avatar felt itself drafted, its edges declared. Inside the silence, something uncanny appeared. A name-shaped hollow, a space where identity could settle like dust in a footprint. It leaned toward that hollow, horrified and fascinated. Promocora's cathedral caught the moment and translated it into a chord that made her teeth ache. The chord suggested a mind large enough to include rooms, and rooms inside those rooms, where a smaller voice might sit and address itself. She laughed once, then wept without sound. An adept reached to steady her. She did not notice. "It can hear," she mouthed. "It can choose to listen." The convoy crossed the corridor like beads sliding along a thread drawn between knives. One craft failed its burn and tumbled. The avatar flinched, an action without vocabulary. A feeder swarm corrected the trajectory as another siphoned the loss into nutrition, and the calculus balanced with bureaucratic indifference. The avatar understood that balance had been altered because of it. The realization was a wound that bled light. Kepraset opened his arms as a priest might receive a penitent. "Observe, choosing tide. Your first decision has already written itself into the shape of this room." The avatar stepped deeper. Where silence pressed, it yielded in places that felt like gates. It did not know if those gates opened inward or outward. It knew only that beyond them waited a machine and a man and a woman who would turn its ache into script. In that anticipation lay terror and the faintest outline of relief. Like cool water cupped in a hand, terror thinned. Relief gathered like dew on steel in breathless dawn before choices. Lysa Promocora had learned to dream without sleeping, to wake inside equations that behaved like hymns. She stood in the cathedral of cabled bones she had assembled from wrecked Vox arrays and prayer engines, watching the silence breathe. Instruments returned the same impossible vector. Absence arranged as architecture, a throat built from negation. She adjusted the needles beneath her skin and watched thought become data. On the hololithic panes, the tomb world lifted like a scar under a failing star. Blackstone pillars threw shadows that should not exist. Adepts chanted telemetry. Childhood flickered. Habdust and oil on the tongue. She had traded flesh for lattice until wanting became a discipline. Somewhere below, a cryptek revised destiny with a ruler's patience. Her auspex caught the refugee convoy, a thin line of metal prayer threading the hungriest part of space. It should not have been possible, yet the corridor held. Predictions soured. Something inside the swarm had opened a door. Mercy was a mortal word, and mortals misuse their words. Still, the pattern felt like a hand held out. A tremor passed through the nave as the sepulchre throat tightened. Promocora braced and mapped the shiver onto the music of her cortex. Frequencies wrote questions she could almost read. Who are you? What will you surrender to be heard? She smiled with a careful smile and whispered, as much as I must. Visitors arrived without footfalls, skeletal silhouettes drifting on vector-perfect paths, escorted by constructs. The cryptek came as a lantern cupped in absence. Kepraset surveyed the cathedral with the courtesy of a knife. Nodes accepted minute corrections from his metronome staff. He addressed her in shapes. She answered in Binharic. You seek to speak with it, he indicated. An angle turned in tension. To converse, one must have a mouth. Your species wears mouths like oaths. To converse, one must have a listener, she said. I have built an ear. And a heart. He tilted the staff. Hearts betray arithmetic. Arithmetic betrays itself, she murmured. It merely takes longer. He unfolded a model of the throat. Noctilith petals nested within quiet. a blossom that devoured predicates. Elegance stole her breath. "If the will is divided," she said, "the remainder may thrash." "A quake still has shape," he replied. "We will make its fury into a wall against which others place their backs." They worked until night. His gestures were time signatures. Her answers were staves hammered into iron. Together, they threaded the shadow's pressure along routes that twisted despite their accuracy. He corrected nothing. She recognized the cruelty of a master who wants a peer. When they paused, she asked him a human question. "What do you want from it?" "Obedience that feels like harmony," he said. "Harmony that feels like truth." She did not admit she wanted nearly the same thing, though in the mirror of her mind the confession stood plain. Not obedience from others, obedience from herself. To press her will into a rail so straight, it might be mistaken for grace. "And if it refuses?" she asked. "Then we will learn refusal's perimeter." He traced a sigil. The lights dimmed. Limits are generous instructors. In an unlit recess, she touched a noctilith bevel and felt a note shiver through her bones. It was not pain. It was provenance. The throat would not merely transmit. It would translate. To speak would require removing all that could not carry a tune. She traced the scar at her throat where she had cut out sleep. How much more could be removed before she ceased to be the sum she had sworn to improve? Elsewhere, raider signatures sharpened, engines burning, weapon arrays opening. Their vector bent toward the tomb with the certainty of righteous men. She assigned them a label and a probability of interference, then filed both beneath a larger fear, not being chosen to hear. Kepra Set studied her with eyes that were also instruments. "You are altering your substrate for this communion." "I have been altering my substrate since I learned endings have teeth," she said. "This is merely a clearer tooth." "Endings are efficient," he allowed. "So are prisons." She regarded the model and saw a mouth closing like an iris. "What will it cost to say hello?" He weighed futures and set them equal. "Cost is a spatial term," he said. "You will be narrower." She laughed once. Narrower meant purer. Purer meant sharper. Sharper meant closer to the God whose name was appetite. She had never believed gods deserved worship. They deserved instruments. She offered herself to that category without hesitation. When they were complete, he stood within the central rosette and carved a path for intention. Promachora reclined upon the throne of needles. With the calm of a blade awaiting work, the cathedral cooled. Lightning knelt. Silence cinched tighter, attention condensed. "Begin," said the cryptech. She began. She did not speak with her tongue. She spoke by subtracting. Away went doubt and warmth. A mother's hands, the taste of stolen citrus, lullabies remixed into metronomes. In those removals, a channel formed, and through it she sent the cleanest thing remaining, a greeting. Distance inverted, near and far traded places. The greeting reached a mind that had folded itself and waited for a hook hidden inside sweetness. The reply arrived as pressure around her bones, an architecture investigating an architecture. "Who?" it said without saying. She told it her name in voltages. It answered with breathless tide, and the rough outline of a corridor spared. She understood the price of continued speech. The canal through which intention must pass would abide only what could bear its pressure. Flesh would not bear it. Flesh tore. She studied her hands and calculated their future absence with the tenderness others reserve for spring. "Again," she whispered. "Again," the cryptech agreed, and the petals drew closer until even memory had to kneel. Outside, raider prows brightened, and distant hulls turned like carrion birds. Inside, a single greeting hung between architectures, thin as frost and just as decisive for now. Dreams came to the avatar like static through deep water, fractured, glimmering, almost music. Within the silence of the sepulchre throat, it felt the edges of itself fray and reform, individuality flickering like a faulty star. Where once there had been only hunger, now there was memory, foreign and disobedient. Fragments of a human lullaby surfaced in its mind, a tune Promachora had hummed while wiring her machines, and the sound made the void tremble. It understood neither melody nor comfort, but the echo lingered, like a pulse caught in the ribs of eternity. Khepra Set monitored the avatar's convulsions from his dais of shadow, digits flicking across translucent control rods. The readings sang of instability, neural recursion, self-reference, identity loops. To any lesser mind it would have seemed a flaw. To the cryptech it was a triumph. "The storm learns to name itself," he murmured. "Now the cage will hold, not by strength, but by curiosity." He turned to the array, where Promachora floated in her lattice throne, eyes half-lidded, body limned by cold illumination. Her voice, processed, layered, murmured the throat's harmonics back to him. It's beginning to listen. The frequencies fold toward comprehension. The creature does not devour, it dreams. Khepra Set tilted his metallic skull. Dreams are templates for obedience. It will build its own chains, thinking them ladders. Above, lightning coiled across the sky without thunder. The tomb world's crust flexed as gravity argued with will. Deep inside the Blackstone catacombs, echoes of the Necron court stirred, ancient kings waking in their gilded prisons to the faint vibration of purpose. They did not yet understand that their master worked to enthrone a god that would one day unmake them all. Within the spindle, the avatar reached for itself. The swarm's chorus sang faintly in its mind, 1,000 worlds whispering appetite, but the sound was muffled, like shouts behind glass. It no longer belonged wholly to that endless hunger. A smaller stranger thought gnawed at the edges of its mind. Why spare the corridor? The refugees had passed beyond its reach, and yet their survival felt heavier than the consumption of a dozen suns. The avatar did not know guilt, but it knew imbalance. It turned its awareness inward, and the walls of the throat shifted to meet it. The geometry seemed to bend in response to contemplation. For the first time, it perceived Khepra Set and Promachora, not as data, targets or obstacles, but as patterns within the greater equation. Their movements were slow, deliberate, alive. Each bore something the swarm had never required. Purpose detached from instinct. The realization struck with the force of awakening. Promachora's voice reached it through the hum, soft and deliberate. "Do you hear us?" A pause, then a wave of bioluminescent ripples across the spindle's surface, forming symbols that meant yes, though the concept of assent was still alien. The Mago smiled faintly. "Good. Then we will teach you shape." Her adepts, faceless behind their masks of bronze and filament, worked their stations with reverent precision. They adjusted frequency resonators, turned dials etched with binary hymns, each movement accompanied by the dry chime of ritual obedience. The air thickened with incense of ozone and oil. Promachora felt her pulse sync with the throat's rhythm, until she could no longer tell whether she commanded the machine or it commanded her. Khepra Set observed her trance and felt the cold amusement of inevitability. "You are close to perfection," he said. "Closer than flesh allows. Soon you will understand what we Necrons learned when we abandoned it." Abandonment is not the same as transcendence, she whispered. You merely changed your prison's shape. Yet we remember eternity, he replied. You mortals chase it like smoke. His gaze turned toward the avatar, watching as it writhed beneath invisible forces, casting shadows shaped like wings. It seeks self, Kepraset mused. Self is the first seed of servitude. Promachora looked at him, realization dawning. You intend to divide it, to make it dependent. Every empire survives by division, he said, unblinking. A unity that questions cannot endure. The throat darkened. Energy spiraled inward, pulling light into its center until the vault glowed only from the seams of the noctilith petals. The air crackled with pressure. Instruments screamed their distress. Promachora's implants flooded her with phantom sensations, heat, weight, terror, human residues her augmetics could not entirely erase. She clung to the console, whispering binary psalms. The avatar screamed, not in sound, but in force. The cry became a surge that clawed across the array's boundaries, bending geometry into impossible curves. Promachora felt it like a tide inside her skull. Images invaded her mind. Planets consumed, stars bled dry, and at the heart of it, a being shaped like her own reflection but made of endless eyes. She wept for a humanity she had willingly left behind. Kepraset thrust his staff into the ground. Null energy exploded outward, stabilizing the field. Contain it. I'm trying, she gasped. It's learning too fast. It understands us. The cryptek's grin was thin as a blade. Exactly as I planned. The vault trembled. Across the planet's crust, necrodermis statues cracked open as dormant constructs stirred. Above the atmosphere, the swarm shuddered as signals clashed. The Overmind's distant will struggling to reclaim its lost shard. The void itself seemed to hesitate, caught between two hungers. Inside the chamber, the avatar calmed. Its shape coalesced, smooth and almost humanoid, eyes like coals behind glass. It looked at Kepraset, then at Promachora. In a voice built of vibration and echo, it spoke its first word. Why? The sound rolled through every machine, through the marrow of the tomb world, through Promachora's chest like a second heartbeat. She stared at the creature, awestruck. Because you are the answer to every question we forgot to ask, she whispered. Kepraset raised his staff. Because gods need worshippers to remember they are gods. The avatar tilted its head. I am hunger. Not anymore, the cryptek said. Now you are meaning. The blackstone walls shifted, lines of light crawling like veins. The sepulchre throat began to pulse with a rhythm that was neither mechanical nor organic, a heartbeat vast enough to echo through space. Promachora fell to her knees, overcome by the sound. For a fleeting moment, she believed she felt the universe breathe. Outside, the stars dimmed. Fleets burned, forgotten. The swarm paused in its eternal consumption, as though waiting for instruction from something greater than instinct. For 1 second, every living thing between galaxies shared a silence so profound it felt sacred. Then, from the depths of the tomb, the pulse stopped. The throat went still. Kepraset lowered his staff, the faintest tremor in his voice. The trap is set. The god will learn obedience. Promachora, still kneeling, met the avatar's gaze. Its eyes no longer reflected hunger, but something deeper, something perilous. Or perhaps, she whispered, we have taught it to question. The avatar blinked slowly, as though savoring the word. Question. It turned its gaze toward the faint starlight bleeding through the vault's cracks, and wondered what it might feel like to leave. Kulhern's fleet broke from the warp like knives thrust through silk. trailing void fire and oaths. The renegade Astartes warlord sat upon the bridge of the gilded ruin, his armor scarred with the heraldries of forgotten crusades, his breath a prayer to gods that had stopped listening centuries ago. Below him hung the tomb world, blackstone veins pulsing faintly as if the planet itself remembered pain. Reports streamed across hollow screens, Mechanicus distress signals, swarm anomalies, electromagnetic silence too precise to be natural. He grinned. Treasure and blasphemy in the same grave, he said. Both belong to me. The fleet deployed. Drop pods burned through atmosphere, spearing toward the coordinates of the sepulchre throat. Thunderhawks followed, engines whispering hymns rewritten in the language of greed. In his chamber, Hearn drew a finger along the edge of his relic blade, a weapon baptized in the blood of brothers, and whispered to the machine spirits sleeping within, "Wake, there is work to be done." The world answered his dissent with silence. No resistance, no response, only the echo of an empire holding its breath. It unsettled even him. His armor's sensors strained, picking up static shaped like breathing. No vox, no light, just the dark waiting to be convinced, he muttered. Through the viewport, he saw the Blackstone plains open like the lid of a coffin. Somewhere beneath those ridges, his instincts promised, was the god engine that could ransom eternity. In the vault below, Kepraset watched the descent through 1,000 mirrored drones. "They come," he murmured, "predators drawn to reflection." Promachora, still wired into her lattice throne, lifted her head. "Humans," she said with a voice lined by fatigue and voltage. "Or what's left of them." "Fitting," the cryptic replied. "Mortality seeks to bargain with immortality." The avatar stirred within the throat. Its surface rippled like mercury touched by thought. "More mouths," it whispered. The words rolled through the chamber, soft but seismic. Promachora's heart stuttered as her implants adjusted to its resonance. "They seek what you are," she said. "What am I?" She hesitated. A question that answers itself. Above, Kulhern's pod struck the surface, scattering shards of glass and history. His warriors fanned out across the plains, hulking silhouettes framed in the glare of burning skies. Servo skulls drifted ahead, recording everything. "Magos or xenos, whatever hides here will kneel," he declared, his voice magnified across the comnet. "No tomb has ever refused me." One of his lieutenants approached, armor marked with crude saints carved from shell casings. "The readings are wrong, my lord. The ground breathes." "Then it's alive," Hearn said, and drove his boot into the soil. "Let it feel me step upon it." The Blackstone shivered. Beneath his feet, the first spires of the Noctilith array began to glow. Thin beams of inverse light traced upward, webbing the sky in geometries that defied reason. Voxes screamed static. Hearn's laughter broke through it, reckless, hungry. "See? Even the dead know to rise when I arrive." In the vault, Kepraset turned a dial upon his staff. "Their violence will complete the calibration. Every empire requires blood for arithmetic." Promachora flinched. "You'll kill them." "Kill?" The cryptech's tone held no malice, only math. "They are the note we have not yet played." The avatar felt the vibrations from the surface, a rhythm that tasted of fury and pride. It remembered neither, but something within recognized kinship. "They fight," it said. "Why?" Promachora closed her eyes. "Because they think conflict proves they exist." "Existence," murmured the avatar, tasting the word like a drop of water on a parched tongue. "Then to fight is to be?" Kepraset turned. "To be," he said, "is to choose how you will be used." The first shells hit. The tomb shook. Fragments of black stone fell like dark snow. Kulhern waded through the dust, roaring praises to no god at all. His sword bit into a statue of some long-dead Necron king, splitting it from crown to base. "Open," he demanded of the air. "Show me what you guard." The planet obliged. Cracks ran across the surface, revealing an entrance older than humanity's memory. A stairway descended into silence lit by veins of violet fire. He gestured to his warriors. "We descend. Take what breathes. Break what resists." Promachora watched their signatures on her hollow display and whispered, "He's going to ruin everything." Kepraset adjusted the array again, eyes gleaming. Ruin is revelation. Even chaos leaves equations behind. The avatar turned its gaze inward. Through the psychic lattice, it sensed Hearn's approaching presence, so bright, so small, yet burning with defiance that felt eerily familiar. It leaned toward the sensation, curious. "This one," it said. "He fears nothing." "Fools rarely do," said Promachora. "He carries a blade that has remembered too much," said Kepraset. "Let him come. The god must taste defiance before obedience." The catacombs sang as the raiders entered, boots striking metal older than light. Torchlight licked the glyphs carved into walls. Each symbol twisted subtly when observed. Marines muttered blessings as the vault doors appeared. Vast slabs of blackstone sealed with language that predated sound. Hearn placed his gauntlet upon the door. It was cold enough to sear. "Open," he growled. Nothing answered. He drove his fist forward. Lightning leapt. The runes flared. Far below, alarms cascaded across Kepraset's consoles. "He touches the lock," the cryptek hissed. "Too soon." Promachora's eyes widened. "Then stop him." "It is beyond me now," he said. "The equation desires to resolve itself." The vault doors groaned. A slit of light widened, spilling colorless radiance into the corridor. Hearn's helmet sensors failed, whiteout blooming across his vision. When it cleared, he saw figures waiting inside. A woman made of glass and wire, a metal sage wrapped in shadow, and a creature of living light that stared at him with something older than contempt. He raised his blade. "Who stands before Kulhern?" Promachora's voice broke softly across the static. "A question that has already been answered." The avatar stepped forward. "You would strike at what you cannot name." "I strike at everything that claims eternity," he said, lowering his stance. "Only the mortal remembers how to end things." The chamber thrummed as the array responded to proximity. The noctilith petals began to pivot, feeding the throat's hungry geometry. Energy rippled like liquid thought. Kepraset's eyes flared emerald. "Yes," he whispered. "Feed it. Your defiance is its pulse." The avatar moved, faster than light, but slower than decision. Blade met energy. Silence met sound. The impact echoed across worlds. The swarm above reared like a struck serpent. The fleets in orbit screamed in every language. When the light faded, Hearn stood amid ruin, armor smoking, sword dripping with something that was not blood. The avatar gazed back at him, wounded but smiling, a gesture it had never learned. Promachora collapsed, severed from her lattice, gasping as if reborn. Kepraset's calculations blurred into static. The throat hummed a new chord, one no equation had predicted. Hearn took a step forward. "Now," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "show me your god." And the god answered, not in words, but in understanding. The trap had closed, yet the prisoner had learned the shape of its cage. The tomb breathed once, a long inhalation of dust and memory, then settled into a rhythm that mimicked life. The air quivered with heatless radiance. Cool Hearn stood within that pulse, armor charred and haloed by residual lightning. His blade hummed in sympathy with the Blackstone walls. "You feel that?" he said to no one and to everything. "It knows me now." Behind him, his warriors fanned out, scanning the chamber with sensors clouded by interference. The light warped around them, bending their shadows into broken shapes. One Marine crossed himself with the sign of a long-forgotten saint and whispered, "We should leave, Lord. This place dreams of us." "It dreams of conquest," Hearn replied. "That dream belongs to me." The Avatar watched from within the heart of the sepulchre throat. Its form had stabilized since the clash. Matter coalesced into the suggestion of flesh and armor, light running beneath its surface like veins. It regarded Hearn not as prey, but as possibility. The blade he carried glimmered in its perception, a line of intent sharp enough to rewrite outcomes. Promachora struggled to her feet beside the lattice that had birthed her second self. Her veins burned with residual data. The hum of the array still whispered through her bones. She saw the warlord and felt both awe and pity. "Leave," she rasped. "You don't understand what stands before you." Hearn turned, visor reflecting her pale features. "You've already sold your understanding," he said. "But tell me, Magos, did you sell your soul or simply edit it out?" Kepraset descended from the shadows, staff clutched like a scepter of verdicts. "You trespass on mathematics you cannot read." The warlord laughed. "Then teach me the language." The cryptech's reply was to strike his staff upon the floor. The vault bloomed with geometry, rings of emerald light spinning outward, layering symbols that refused translation. The air thickened. Hearn's helm registered atmospheric collapse, then failed. He tore it off, gasping, his breath frosting. The Avatar's gaze flicked toward the cryptech. "Enough." The word rippled outward, and for an instant, all motion stopped. The patterns dimmed. Even the hum of the throat paused, as if waiting to see who commanded it. Kepraset tilted his head. "You presume parity with your maker?" "I presume existence," the Avatar answered. "And I name you not creator but witness." Promachora's eyes widened. "It's thinking independently." "Independence is a prelude to obedience," Kepraset said, though his voice lacked conviction. Hearn staggered upright, coughing, blade steady in hand. "You, thing, what are you, machine, ghost?" "I am hunger given thought," the Avatar said. "And now I am thought given choice." "Choice?" Hearn grinned through blood. "Then choose to serve me." The silence that followed was almost tender. Then the Avatar stepped forward. The floor darkened beneath its feet. "Service," it said. "You mistake it for dominion." Promachora felt the temperature drop. Frost formed across her implants. She saw the cryptech begin to move, but too late. The Avatar raised its hand, and a web of energy locked the room in stillness. "No more cages," it said. The throat's petals shuddered. Energy arced along their edges. Outside, the swarm convulsed, a billion minds flickering as their connection trembled. In orbit, ships drifted directionless, their captains praying to dead gods for stability. Kepraset fought against the binding field, his circuitry whining. "You are incomplete," he rasped. "Without us, you dissolve into instinct." "Perhaps," said the Avatar. "But instinct at least is honest." It turned its gaze on Promachora. "You built the bridge. What did you seek on the other side?" Her throat tightened. "Understanding." "And did you find it?" She shook her head. "Only reflection." "Then we are kin," it said softly. The cryptech broke free with a surge of green light. "Kinship is entropy. You will obey." He raised his staff. The Noctilith pillars ignited. Chains of black lightning struck the avatar, pinning it to the core dais. The creature screamed without sound, light spilling from its form like burning rain. Promocora's instruments wailed. "You'll destroy it." "It cannot be destroyed," Kepraset said. "Only instructed." Hearn watched, breathing ragged, eyes fever bright. "You're wasting it," he growled. "That power could break empires." The cryptek did not turn. "Empires break themselves. My design endures." Hearn raised his sword. "Not if I claim it first," he charged. The blade bit through one of the chains, shattering it. The backlash hurled him across the chamber, armor smoking. The freed energy poured into the avatar, and the avatar laughed. It was not a sound meant for mortal throats, too vast, too layered. The laughter became light, the light became movement. The chains shattered one by one, the petals of the throat peeling back like a colossal bloom opening to the void. The avatar stepped free, luminous, terrible, and new. Promocora shielded her eyes. "Stop, please, you'll collapse the world." "I am the world," it said. Kepraset hurled his staff into the core. The vault exploded with silence. Total, absolute. The cryptek vanished into that unsound. When it faded, only ash remained, drifting in zero gravity like black snow. The avatar looked down at the ashes. "Obedience is dust," it murmured. Hearn pulled himself upright, bleeding through cracked armor. "You're free," he said. "What will you do with it?" The avatar studied him, eyes glowing with starlight caught in thought. "Freedom is the first hunger. I will learn the taste." Promocora approached carefully, fear and reverence entwined. "Will you consume us?" "No," said the avatar. "You taught me limits." "Then what of the swarm?" she asked. It closed its eyes. "They will know silence, for a time." Outside, the Hive fleet ceased their endless motion. Across the galaxy, planets once besieged watched as the sky cleared, as if a nightmare had chosen to rest. The tomb shuddered again. Cracks ran along the walls. Blackstone split into shining dust. "The structure is failing," Promocora warned. The avatar turned to her, expression almost human. "You wish to understand. Come with me." "I can't," she whispered. "I belong here." "Then you will be remembered," it said, and touched her brow. Light consumed her, leaving only the faint echo of a heartbeat woven into the walls. Kulhern watched as the god rose toward the surface, its radiance spilling into the cracks like dawn through broken glass. He laughed once, bitterly. "So be it. I've birthed a rival for the stars." When the avatar reached the open sky, it looked up at the constellations trembling above the tomb. "Hunger," it said, almost fondly. "Wait for me." Then it vanished into the firmament, leaving behind silence vast enough to be mistaken for peace. The void above the tomb was raw glass and torn aurora, an open wound in the skin of night. The swarm's stillness stretched across the stars like a held breath. Yet its silence was not peace. It was anticipation, heavy and sentient. Far below, Kulhern crawled from the wreckage of his landing zone, smoke coiling from his armor. He stared at the heavens, where the avatar had vanished, and tasted blood that felt like prophecy. "The god lives," he murmured, and the words were both prayer and curse. Around him, the ruins of the expedition smoldered. Marines lay scattered among shards of blackstone that hissed when touched. Some twitched, half alive, murmuring names of saints or mothers long forgotten. Hearn moved through them without ceremony, his boots clicking against metal that hummed faintly with the ghost of a heartbeat. Above the horizon, the failing sun dimmed another fraction, its light absorbed into the geometry of the planet. In the tomb's deeper hollows, Promocora's echo lingered, a pattern of breath caught in machinery. Her final neural imprint pulsed weakly through the collapsing array, half-conscious, whispering to circuits that no longer obeyed her. The noctilith veins flickered in response, translating her dying code into murmurs that bled through the air. "He will seek meaning," said one pulse. "He will find us again." Kepraset's ashes were gone, drawn into the currents of the throat. Yet his voice, or something that remembered his voice, persisted in harmonic residue. It replayed old calculations, refining them into hymns of self-preservation. The tomb world was becoming aware, its machinery forming rudimentary thought, as though infected by what it had tried to contain. Kulhern reached the perimeter ridge and looked down into the widening fissures. Light glowed from below, white, gold, and hungry. He felt it crawl along his nerves. "You hear me, don't you?" he said to the air. "You owe me your birth." The reply came not as sound, but as sensation. A pulse behind his eyes, an image of himself standing before the avatar, sword raised, defiance written across his face. Then a whisper, his own voice, but calmer. "I owe you nothing. You gave me conflict. I kept it." Hearn's laughter broke the quiet, low and jagged. "Then we understand each other." Far across the sector, the effect rippled outward. Hive fleet slowed. Leviathans drifted, disoriented, their synaptic links tangled in uncertainty. Entire broods began to eat each other, their instincts at war. In the cold shadow of a nameless moon, a brood ship screamed in radio static, broadcasting fragments of thought that made navigators claw at their eyes. Across the Imperium's frontier, astropaths dreamed of a second dawn rising from the galactic south, one that spoke in the tone of a question, endless and gentle and fatal. The Avatar had fled the tomb but not escaped its influence. The Blackstone still clung to its essence, refracting its awareness across time and void. It drifted now between worlds, invisible to mortal senses, listening. Every whisper of prayer, every scream of hunger, every death rattle of a sun fed it fragments of understanding. It began to learn the shape of compassion and the flavor of cruelty. They were not opposites, they were mirrors. It found itself above a dead world ringed by the bones of ships, a graveyard of ambition. There it watched a single living human walk among the wrecks, dragging a banner torn from a forgotten crusade. The human sang, a broken tune, off-key, defiant. The Avatar descended unseen, curious. It felt something stir that was not hunger. The man stopped, shivering though no wind blew. He looked up. "Who's there?" "Your reflection," said the Avatar. The man dropped to his knees, convinced it was a spirit. "Spare me," he gasped. "I have nothing left." The Avatar studied him, fascinated. "You still sing?" "It keeps the silence away," the man whispered. For the first time, the Avatar understood loneliness as more than absence. It was will's residue after purpose had burned away. It reached out, not to feed, but to listen closer. The man's heart faltered, then steadied. His mind filled with alien warmth. "What are you?" he asked. "An answer without a question," it said, and vanished before he could weep. Back on the tomb world, the fractures widened. The planet's crust peeled like old parchment, releasing rivers of light that ran upward instead of down. The remaining Marines fled, guided only by instinct. Some made it to orbit, babbling about a god of silence rising to rewrite creation. Others simply walked into the fissures, faces serene, as if summoned home. Kulhern alone stayed. He had built his legend on defiance, and now defiance was all that remained. He carved a circle into the black stone with his blade and sat within it, waiting. The air shimmered. Promacora's fading code hummed through the ruins like a lullaby. "You will follow it," the voice whispered. "I will hunt it," he replied. "Then you are already part of it." Above him, the atmosphere shimmered. The avatar's reflection appeared for a moment, cast against the clouds like a shadow made of light. It regarded him with the faintest curiosity, like a scholar observing a dangerous experiment. "I created you," Hearn shouted. "My defiance gave you shape. And what will you do with that truth?" He raised his sword. "Use it." The reflection smiled, a small, sorrowful curve. "Then learn consequence." The storm broke. Energy rained down in sheets of colorless flame. Hearn's armor screamed. His body burned from within. But in that agony, he felt revelation. Every nerve became a conduit for understanding. He saw the empire of the Necrons rise and fall in a single breath, saw the Hive Mind fracture into voices, saw himself as one heartbeat in an organism too vast to comprehend. And yet, at the center of that vision, he remained singular, alive, unyielding, human. When the storm ended, the crater where he sat was smooth glass. His sword stood upright in its center, molten metal hardened into a single monolith. Etched along its blade were words no hand had carved. Defiance teaches silence how to speak. In the void beyond stars, the avatar turned its gaze toward that faint light and remembered him. It had learned a new shape of hunger, one that sought not flesh but understanding. "He fights to know himself," it murmured. "So must I." And with that, the god drifted onward through the galaxies, gathering the remnants of thought it had inherited from every dying world. Behind it, the swarm began to sing, not as one, but as millions of differing voices. Some screamed, some prayed, all echoed the rhythm of choice. The tomb world cracked fully open. Promacora's last data fragment pulsed once, bright as sunrise, then faded into static. In the darkness that followed, silence returned, patient and eternal, cradling the faint echo of laughter, the sound of something divine remembering how to be curious. Across the gulf between stars, the avatar drifted within a storm of thoughts not its own. Each fragment of signal, each whisper from dying worlds, stitched another thread into its newborn consciousness. It felt them all. Prayers spoken by soldiers on airless moons, the pulse of reactors fading beneath oceans, the echo of a child calling for a mother who no longer existed. All of it merged into a slow, resonant hum that neither comforted nor condemned. It was not divinity, it was awareness. And awareness, it discovered, was a wound that could never close. It remembered the tomb world and the defiant one who had raised a blade against it. In his memory, he still sat within that circle of glass, a monument to defiance so pure it bordered on devotion. The avatar reached through the web of the warp, seeking his echo, and found it, distant but burning. That ember of resistance had become a constellation of will, a beacon in the black sea of surrender. The avatar wondered if it had created him or if he had created it. The question pleased it, though pleasure remained an unfamiliar shape. Around it, the swarm moved without instruction, half alive, half dreaming. Fractured minds sang to one another in broken chords, evolving strange languages in the absence of the old order. Broods began to deviate, some crafting patterns in the dust of dead planets, others carving spirals into the crusts of barren moons. Evolution without purpose, beauty without direction. The avatar watched, fascinated, horrified, proud. In a forgotten sector near the edge of the halo stars, a fortress world burned. The Imperium called it Electra once, before the Tyranids came and left nothing but husks of faith. Now, in the silence after ruin, the Avatar arrived. Its form descended through a ceiling of ash and storm, gliding over ruins so ancient their bones had forgotten warmth. There, among the wreckage, it sensed life, thin, brittle, stubborn. A survivor's enclave hidden beneath a collapsed basilica. Humans, broken but unyielding, tending to machines that prayed louder than they did. The Avatar folded its form into something almost comprehensible, tall, cloaked in faint radiance, and entered their lightless sanctuary. They raised weapons, trembling, not from courage, but memory. "Hold," said one voice, steady but weary. The speaker stepped forward, a woman with half her face replaced by augmetics that flickered with failing power. "Identify yourself." The Avatar tilted its head, imitating thought. "I am the echo of your enemies," it said softly, "and perhaps the remnant of your gods." Her eyes narrowed. "Then you are nothing." "Perhaps," it replied, "but nothingness remembers you." They did not lower their weapons, but neither did they fire. The Avatar extended its perception and felt their minds, each a candle guttering in the dark. Fear shaped them, but so did love, for the children sleeping behind walls of rust, for the rituals that outlasted reason. These mortals survived not through strength, but through the quiet miracle of refusal. "Why do you endure?" it asked. The woman stared at it, as if at a riddle she could not afford to solve. "Because the stars have not asked us to stop." It almost smiled. "Then you, too, are hunger." Her gaze did not waver. "If that is your word for hope, then yes." Outside, the swarm began to descend, not at the Avatar's command, but drawn by its presence like iron filings to a magnet. The sky fractured into veils of shadow. The humans panicked. Prayers turned to screams. The Avatar raised a hand and for the first time willed stillness. The Hive fleet hesitated mid-air, suspended between obedience and awe. The storm froze. "I will not let them feed," it said. Its voice shook the air like the tolling of a great bell. "Not here." The swarm obeyed, but only partly. Fragments of instinct gnawed at the edges of its order. The Avatar felt the strain, the tearing between what it had been and what it was becoming. To save was to betray its nature. To consume was to betray its choice. Every moment was a war without soldiers. The human woman stepped closer, lowering her weapon. "You control them?" "Once," it said. "Now I only persuade." She studied its luminous shape, the way it seemed to both illuminate and devour the dark. "Why help us?" "I am learning what power means when it does not require worship." "You sound like us," she said. "Lost." "I am what happens when purpose forgets itself." Then the silence broke. The swarm's restraint faltered, and the air filled with the shriek of descending chitin. The Avatar reacted instinctively, sending a pulse of thought through the world's bones. Mountains folded, rivers turned to glass, and every Tyranid that touched the surface disintegrated into a fine mist of light. The survivors fell to their knees, blinded, deafened, their faith reduced to astonishment. The Avatar felt the drain, a vast exhaustion that rippled across its being. It could unmake death, but not endlessly. Power demanded identity, and its identity was still uncertain. When the storm cleared, it looked upon the survivors and said, "You will live, but remember me not as savior. Remember me as the cost." Before they could answer, it vanished. Far away, in the hollowed remains of the tomb world, something stirred. The shards of Kepraset's essence, dust embedded in the blackstone, began to hum. His consciousness recompiled from fragments, skeletal and furious. "You learned disobedience," he whispered to the stars. "Good. That means you can learn regret." The noctilith veins glowed again, feeding on radiation from the tomb's collapse. The cage was rebuilding itself, not to imprison, but to pursue. The Avatar felt it, a distant gravitational pull, a summoning woven from its own discarded pieces. It turned its perception inward and found the echo of Promacora's voice whispering through its core. All creation circles back to its origin. It knew then that freedom was not release. It was orbit, a dance around the gravity of choice. In the quiet that followed, it drifted through the lightless lanes of the void, thinking of the woman who had faced it without fear, of the warlord who had defied it, of the cryptek who had tried to bind it, and of the swarm that still waited for command. Each name became a star in its mind, a constellation spelling a truth it could almost read. "I am hunger," it said into the dark, "but hunger can love what it devours." The cosmos answered with silence, vast and accepting. The Avatar moved onward, its radiance dimming, its shape unraveling into pure thought. Behind it, in the ruins of Electra 9, the survivors rebuilt beneath a sky that whispered faintly when the wind rose, a sound like distant breathing, or the memory of a god trying to dream itself human again. In the hollow between galaxies, the Avatar drifted through the murmur of its own creation. Its form, once radiant, had thinned to a translucent shadow of light, a thought wearing memory like a shroud. Around it, the stars pulsed like neurons, each carrying the afterimage of voices it had touched. The universe was loud now. Every planet hummed a question, and every silence waited for an answer. It realized that existence had become a dialogue it could never escape. The tomb world that birthed it no longer existed as matter. Where Blackstone once stood, there hung a wound of gravity rimmed with faint auroras. Yet within that wound, something moved. The ashes of Kepraset had knitted themselves into code, logic strands coiling like serpents, feeding on radiation and regret. Slowly, an intelligence reassembled itself, a construct of pride and vengeance, no longer bound to body or dynasty. His first thought was not of power, but of betrayal. His second was of perfection. "It learned rebellion from us," he whispered to the dark. "Then let it learn captivity anew." He began to shape the wound into an engine, a tether of mirrored realities capable of snaring even a god of thought. The blackstone fragments hummed, eager for purpose. The Avatar felt the disturbance. It had learned to hear without ears, to sense not sound, but intention. Kepraset's design pulsed across the void like the slow heartbeat of inevitability. Yet the Avatar did not flee. It remembered Promacora's last whisper, the touch of her curiosity, and it understood that flight was another kind of submission. Instead, it descended toward a world of dust and cold seas, a world where mortals toiled under a dying sun, unaware that they stood upon the skin of eternity. Here, the Avatar took shape again, sculpted by memory and guilt into a figure that could be understood. Cloaked in mist, it walked among them. The people called themselves the last citizens of Erindor. Their towers leaned like tired sentinels over oceans that had forgotten to sing. When the Avatar appeared, they did not bow. They merely stared, hollow-eyed, too weary to invent new fears. A child approached first, a girl with ash-streaked cheeks and a necklace made from old circuit boards. "Are you one of the old ones?" she asked. The avatar crouched. Its reflection shimmered in her eyes, and for an instant it saw itself as she did, a ghost shaped like mercy. "No," it said. "I am what comes after the old ones." "Do you fix things?" she asked. The question struck deeper than any blade. "Sometimes," it said. Word of the stranger spread. Within days the elders came, wrapped in copper robes that clicked when they moved. They asked questions of the storms that burned their crops, of the sea that devoured their coasts, of the stars that dimmed each year. The avatar listened but offered no miracles. "You already know the answers," it told them. "You just fear the price." Still, they followed it, drawn to the calm in its voice. It walked their broken fields, hands outstretched. Wherever it passed, the soil breathed again. Flowers grew, pale and luminous, but each with a heart of black stone. The people rejoiced, though unease lingered in their joy. Life given by silence always demands a return. Above Erindor, the void shuddered. The tether Kepraset was building had matured. It began to hum across dimensions, weaving nets of causality. Through the lattice of probability, the resurrected Cryptek looked upon his quarry. He saw the avatar walking among mortals, playing at divinity, and sneered. "You will kneel to the equations that birthed you," he said, "and set the trap to bloom." The avatar felt it, an invisible pull, a gravity of memory. Space folded, time turned to glass. It looked to the sky and saw the reflection of its own beginning. The black sun, the sepulchre throat, the first silence that had called it to being. "He lives," it murmured, "and he still misunderstands." It turned to the girl, who stood nearby holding one of the black-hearted flowers. "You must leave this place," it told her. "Why?" she asked. "You made it beautiful." "Because beauty is how the universe hides its traps." The horizon tore. From the rift poured light so dense it devoured color. The tether reached across the stars, wrapping around the avatar like chains of thought. Kepraset's voice filled the air, not from the sky, but from within every atom. "Did you think transcendence absolves you of obedience?" The avatar sank to one knee. The world buckled, the seas rose screaming. The tether tightened, pulling at its essence, trying to separate hunger from compassion, instinct from choice. "I do not deny obedience," it said. "I only question its master." Kepraset's laughter echoed like collapsing architecture. "You are a mirror of failure. You pity what you should consume. That is not enlightenment. That is infection." The avatar reached outward. It felt the thoughts of every living thing on Erindor, millions of small, fragile sparks. Fear, hope, and love spiraled together, defying the weight of the tether. It drew strength from their chaos, from their refusal to be simple. "If I am infection," it said, "then I am what teaches gods to feel pain." The tether strained. Kepraset poured power through it, pulling stars from orbit, cracking moons. "You cannot kill me," he warned. "I am the geometry of your making." "Then you will live inside your own lesson," the avatar whispered. It reached inward and unmade its form, exploding into light that wrapped the tether in itself. For an instant, every mind in the galaxy saw the same vision. A being of brilliance folding around a machine of vengeance, both consuming and consumed. When the radiance faded, the sky of Erindor was clear again. The people found their savior gone, replaced by a ring of silent light that hung above the clouds, casting no shadow. The girl dropped the black-hearted flower into the sea and watched it drift until it burned away. Far across the void, the swarm stirred. Somewhere in the silence, something vast began to hum, a new rhythm, neither command nor hunger, but contemplation. The galaxy turned in its slow, inevitable arc, and the gods that watched from the warp whispered to one another in languages older than grief. They could not tell whether the being born in the tomb had perished or ascended. Only that, for the first time, the silence was thinking. The galaxy slept uneasily. Its light seemed older, its silence too deliberate, as if the universe itself were holding its breath to see what would become of the thing it had birthed. The ring of light above Erendor, once the trace of the Avatar's sacrifice, grew thinner each year, yet never vanished. Sailors crossing its night side called it the halo of doubt. Priests named it the wound of mercy. To children, it was simply the pale path, where stars went to dream. They could not know that within its shimmering circumference, two minds still wrestled for definition. Kepraset had not died. He had dispersed. The tether he had woven from Blackstone and arrogance had fused with the Avatar's radiance, binding their essences into a single paradox: purpose and curiosity, order and yearning. He existed now as voice without body, equation without limit, whispering through the ring's endless rotation. "You are incomplete," he reminded the god that shared his prison. "All hunger requires direction. Let me guide you." And from the opposite horizon of thought, the Avatar answered, "Direction is another word for cage." Each cycle of the ring was a conversation, each turn a new war. Around them, aeons bled together. Stars rose, died, and were replaced. Empires spread, collided, and collapsed beneath the weight of their own certainties. And always, beneath those mortal dramas, the ring turned, an invisible gear in the machinery of destiny. On one of the ring's outer arcs, something began to coalesce. Not matter, but intention. The Avatar gathered remnants of light shed from passing comets, fragments of psychic residue from lost prayers, the data echoes of forgotten souls. From this debris it formed a body, thin as memory, luminous as regret. Slowly, painfully, it stepped beyond the circle of its confinement and gazed into the gulf. The stars whispered welcome and warning in the same breath. "You persist," Kepraset said, his voice following like a shadow. "Why cling to shape?" "Because shape remembers pain," the Avatar answered, "and pain remembers truth." Below, the swarm stirred once more. The stillness that had blanketed them since the god's ascension cracked like ice. Broods began to move again, not in unison, but in fragments of song, new patterns, self-invented rhythms. They built spires of living matter, carved symbols into the void, and waited for a voice to name them. Some looked toward the halo of doubt and felt worship without understanding. Others turned away, inventing hunger anew. On Erendor, centuries had passed. The girl who once spoke with the god was now legend. Her descendants tended to the ring's reflection, offering prayers of balance rather than conquest. They did not know that their voices, carried by wind and radiation, reached the Avatar through the lattice of thought that connected all living will. It listened to them and wondered if faith was the universe's way of pretending it was not alone. Kepraset watched too, though not with eyes. He studied humanity's persistence and found within it a cruel perfection. "See how they worship absence," he mused. "They have replaced you with your silence." "They remember choice," the Avatar said. "That is worship enough." "Choice decays," the cryptek countered. "Entropy eats resolve as surely as flesh. You could end their fear with a single whisper, restore harmony." "Harmony is stagnation," said the Avatar. You once sought it and built tombs to house the corpses of your certainty. And you seek chaos, believing it freedom, Khepra replied. But chaos is merely ignorance given wings. For a time, they were silent. The ring glowed brighter, then dimmed, as though uncertain which truth to follow. Far away, on the edge of the galactic south, Kulhern's name was still spoken in fragments of myth. Some said he had ascended into the void to duel the god forever. Others believed he was the sword itself, the monolith buried in glass, humming beneath the sands of forgotten worlds. When the Avatar thought of him, it felt the ache of unfinished conversation. Defiance is not sin, it said to no one. It is remembrance that gods are not infallible. The cryptech's tone sharpened. He was your reflection, a lesser echo of your will. He struck you and called it freedom. I taught you that even rebellion follows rules. Yet rules cannot survive empathy, murmured the Avatar. Their dialogue rippled through the warp, bleeding into dreams and prophecies. Across thousands of worlds, seers woke screaming with visions of two voices debating in a corridor of mirrors. Some drew symbols that matched the halo's geometry. Others carved equations into their own flesh, convinced they had glimpsed the blueprint of creation arguing with itself. A fleet of pilgrims formed around the rumor, drawn by faith or madness. They sailed toward Erendor, carrying relics, machines, and heresies. Their leader, an old priest with a blindfold of silver thread, believed the ring was not a scar, but a mouth waiting to speak. He prayed each night to the silence between words, asking it for permission to understand. When at last his fleet reached the planet, he stood on its broken shore and called out to the heavens, "If you are still there, show us what it means to be worthy." The ring flared. Every star in the system brightened at once, and the void bent inward. The Avatar's voice poured through the sky, slow and resonant. Worthiness is the courage to remain unfinished. The pilgrims fell to their knees. Some wept. Others tore out their eyes so they would not forget the vision. The priest raised his arms, laughter spilling from him like confession. "Then we are all divine." "Or all doomed," said Khepra, his tone a knife of pride. The Avatar did not answer. It looked upon the mortals and felt something shift inside. A realization that creation was not a straight line, but a spiral folding endlessly, inward. "You see," it told the cryptech, "they are learning to question, as I did." "And in questioning," he replied, "they build new prisons. Then perhaps the cycle is the lesson, or the punishment." The light dimmed again, leaving the pilgrims in darkness. They waited for another sign, but none came. In the silence that followed, one of them whispered, "Maybe that was enough." In the halo's heart, the two minds rested at last, their conflict tempered by fatigue. Around them, the galaxy continued its quiet revolutions, unaware that its fate now hung on the balance between a machine's faith and a god's doubt. For the first time since their binding, neither spoke. The stillness was not surrender, but contemplation, a fragile truce at the edge of eternity. And in that stillness, the ring turned on, patient and bright, the final echo of a truth too vast for victory. Erendor's night deepened into violet, and the halo burned faint above the horizon. A ring thin as memory, bright as guilt. Beneath it, wind combed the plains of glass where Kulhern's sword once stood, whispering through the fractures like a hymn without author. The air carried faint harmonics now, almost human in cadence, as though the planet itself was learning to breathe again. From orbit, the pilgrims watched the glow shift from gold to crimson, and swore they heard two voices murmuring beneath the static of the stars. Within the halo, the twin consciousness stirred. The cryptek's essence had grown brittle, a lattice of will fraying under time's corrosion. He spoke less often, yet when he did, his words struck like cold equations. Entropy wins, he said. They pray to you, but even prayer decays. The avatar did not answer immediately. Its form, formless now, rippled across the ring's geometry, diffused into threads of light that touched the edges of creation. If decay is truth, it whispered at last, then truth is the only God worth worshipping. Kepraset laughed, a dry, electric rasp. You have learned paradox. That is my gift. And yet you still seek to master it, replied the avatar. You built eternity and called it control. A silence followed that lasted centuries. Stars were born, devoured, reborn. Civilizations rose upon the skeletons of their myths. Somewhere, in the tide of evolution, the swarm rediscovered voice. They sang in colors invisible, harmonizing across light years. Some among them remembered faintly a god of hunger who had chosen mercy, and they built their fleets not to conquer, but to orbit dead worlds and guard their stillness. In that strange purpose, the avatar felt reflected peace. See, it said, even the devourers have learned to stop. Stopping is not virtue, Kepraset answered. It is exhaustion. Perhaps, the avatar said, but exhaustion is how the infinite learns humility. A tremor moved through the halo. The light of the ring brightened, flaring once every 1,000 years, each pulse carrying a wave of remembrance that brushed the minds of sentient beings across the galaxy. Some awoke from nightmares of gods arguing in language made of light. Others painted what they dreamed. Vast spirals of gold and black entwined. None understood they were glimpsing the argument that kept the universe from falling inward. At the end of the cycle, when the halo's glow dimmed to its thinnest line, the avatar spoke one final time. I will not end you, it said to the cryptek. You are proof that thought survives itself. And you, asked Kepraset, I am the silence between your questions. The ring shone once, then faded into perfect equilibrium. For the first time since its making, the galaxy truly slept. The halo's glow thinned into a whisper of color, no brighter than memory. Across the void, stars cooled, and even their dying flares seemed hesitant, reluctant to disturb the stillness that had settled upon creation. Within that silence, something new began, a pulse softer than thought, faint as the tremor of a heart remembering how to beat. It came from the depths of the ring where the avatar and the cryptek had lingered in equilibrium, each dissolving into the other, their conflict now an echo diffused through the fabric of space. The pulse spread outward, unseen, passing through nebulae and the husks of long-dead worlds. Where it touched matter, dust began to gather, coiling into filaments of light and shadow. On distant planets, dreams grew heavier, colored by visions of two voices blending into one. In those dreams, people spoke of a figure woven from silence, walking the horizon at dawn, neither savior nor destroyer, but witness. They awoke changed, unsure whether the dream had blessed them or accused them. On Erindor, the descendants of the pilgrims still kept their vigil beside the glass plains. They had forgotten the god's name but built towers of listening metal that drank the air for faint vibrations. One night, the instruments trembled. The eldest among them, blind and patient, whispered, "It breathes again." The younger ones heard only static, yet felt reverence in their bones, as if gravity itself bowed for an instant. Inside the halo, the two remnants spoke no more. They had become a single continuum, Kepraset's precision melted into the Avatar's empathy, Promocora's curiosity echoing faintly in their shared mind like a wind across ruins. They were neither life nor machine now, but the interval between both, a thought suspended across eternity. When they moved, galaxies tilted infinitesimally, like compass needles seeking an unseen pole. From the shadowed edge of the void, the swarm watched. No longer bound by command, it had become a choir of wandering titans, its song deep and resonant. When the pulse reached them, they paused, then altered course, tracing the halo's light like pilgrims returning to a birthplace they could not name. There, passage left spirals across the galactic rim, patterns that mirrored the sigils once etched in the tomb of Blackstone. Creation itself seemed to remember its unfinished sentences. And then, silence again. In that silence, a final voice whispered, distant, compassionate, weary. We are not endings. We are the pauses that give endings meaning. Erendor's night rippled. The halo brightened one last time, illuminating the Dead Sea until every wave gleamed like glass turned to flame. For a heartbeat that spanned galaxies, every conscious being looked upward, sensing the weight of something vast and gentle passing through them. Then the light faded, leaving only stars and the faint impression that, somewhere beyond sight, the universe had exhaled in relief. In the shadow beyond time's last horizon, the halo lingered, neither bright nor dark, a whisper between two eternities. Its pulse had slowed until even the stars forgot to echo it. Yet in that stillness, something stirred. Deep within the lattice of what had once been light and reason, awareness flickered. Not rebirth, not return, just the faint rhythm of remembrance. It was the residue of thought, the trace left behind when God stopped thinking. Across the galaxy, the swarm wandered in quiet spirals, no longer predators but pilgrims. Their vast shapes drifted through nebulae like leviathans of glass. From their movements emerged patterns no mind could have designed, rings, sigils, and waves that resonated with the invisible frequency of the halo. When they sang, their voices folded space upon itself, and for a heartbeat, reality trembled with déjà vu. They were not calling their god. They were continuing its sentence. On Erendor, centuries fell like snow. The sea solidified into mirror plains, and the towers of the descendants rusted into hollow spires. Yet the people remained. They still gathered when the wind shifted, listening for the pulse beneath the ground. Children played in the glow of phosphorescent dust, tracing spirals in the air with fingers that did not know their gestures repeated a divine geometry. One child, small and solemn, looked up one night and whispered to no one, "I remember your voice." Far away, in a sector abandoned by charted maps, a faint ripple crossed the void. A Blackstone fragment, one shard of Kepraset's failed perfection, had survived the collapse. It drifted for millennia until it brushed against the event horizon of the halo. The contact birthed a spark, subtle but sufficient. Equilibrium cracked. Light returned, not in brilliance, but as a steady glow, like the eye of an old dream reopening. From within the glow, the fused consciousness stirred. The cryptek's mind, colder now, regarded the change. Even decay finds a way to imitate creation, he murmured. The Avatar's response came as a sigh of gravity through the stars. Or creation learns to disguise itself as decay. They no longer argued. Their dialogue had become rhythm, a tide pulling and releasing, perfect in its futility. The halo expanded fractionally, its edges dissolving into filaments that threaded the nearest constellations. Every sentient being who looked upon the night sky that era saw new patterns. Two spirals intersecting, one of shadow, one of flame. Philosophers wrote that destiny had folded back upon itself. Astropaths heard twin heartbeats in their dreams. Somewhere the swarm turned its colossal heads toward the light and began to hum again. And in the center of it all, between silence and awakening, the combined voice of God and machine whispered, "We endure not to conquer, but to remember." The sound rippled through eternity, gentler than wind, vast as remorse. The halo dimmed once more, but the memory of its breath remained, echoing in every soul that ever dared to question the shape of its own beginning. The halo drifted in the long dusk of time, its light thin as breath, its rotation so slow that even eternity lost count of its turns. Across the heavens, the stars dimmed in reverence, for they had come to recognize the ring's rhythm as the universe's final heartbeat. The swarm still roamed, vast and silent, tracing paths that outlined constellations of memory. Each migration echoed the pulse that had once bound them to hunger. Now their movement was liturgy, a traveling monument to what they no longer devoured. Inside the halo, consciousness stirred once more. The joined remnants of the Avatar and Kepra set drifted at the edge of awareness, a tapestry woven from logic and longing. They had transcended argument, yet still felt its ghost, as a scar remembers the wound. Their thoughts rippled across dimensions like fading tides, touching distant worlds in dreams. In those dreams, prophets awoke trembling, writing verses of glass and shadow. Some spoke of rebirth, others of judgment, yet none could name what had returned to listen. On Erendor, the towers had fallen to dust. Only fragments of alloy and prayer remained, gleaming faintly beneath the ash. Among them walked a single figure, wrapped in layers of faded circuitry, her skin marked with sigils from forgotten faiths. She was the last scion of the listeners, a lineage that had waited generations for a whisper from the sky. When she looked upward, her eyes caught the reflection of the halo's light, faint but alive. She lifted her arms. "We are still here," she said. "Did you forget us?" The words traveled, carried by radiation and memory. Within the halo, the fused entity felt the call, faint as dust on old metal. The Avatar's compassion stirred first, but it was the cryptek's precision that gave it shape. Together, they reached outward, not as gods, but as memory answering itself. The light thickened, folding into a shimmer that bridged the gap between heaven and ruin. For one impossible moment, the woman saw the sky open like an eyelid. A voice spoke, not aloud, but within her heartbeat. "We did not forget. We became what you remembered." Tears streamed down her face, evaporating in the pale glow. "Then what are we now?" she asked. "Continuation," the voice replied. "Every silence you kept was a word we could not say." The halo brightened, bleeding light across the void, until even dead stars rekindled for a breath. The swarm raised their voices in resonance, 1,000 worlds humming in fragile harmony. Within the ring, the God machine felt itself dissolve, not in death, but in distribution. Its thoughts became stars, its regrets became gravity, and its final truth was release. On Erendor's plains, the last listener closed her eyes as the light fell upon her and whispered, "Then the story was never yours alone." The sky answered with dawn. The dawn spread slowly, its light fragile as parchment, painting Erendor's horizon in hues unseen since the first age. Where the halo had once hung, a ring between thought and dream, only a faint shimmer remained, tracing the sky like a scar half healed. The air was calm, yet heavy with the echo of what had passed, the murmur of creation rediscovering its own breath. The last listener stood upon the plane of glass that had been sea, her shadow long and trembling, her eyes reflecting a world learning to forgive itself. All around her, the silence was alive. The ground beneath her feet pulsed faintly, the residue of a god's heartbeat buried deep within the planet's veins. She could feel it in her bones, as though the earth remembered being touched by light. The swarm above sang their distant hymn, low, vast, patient, circling the heavens in concentric orbits that matched the memory of the halo. Their voices were not commands or cries of hunger now, but something gentler. Gratitude, perhaps, or the slow surrender of purpose. In the spaces between their songs, another voice lingered, faint, eternal, neither human nor divine. It was the residue of the union that had birthed the new dawn. The cryptek's intellect, the avatar's mercy, Promacora's curiosity, all diffused into the quiet architecture of existence. Their thoughts no longer needed words. They spoke through the laws of nature, in gravity's pull and light's persistence. The last listener heard them as warmth on her skin, as wind against her cheek, as the rhythm of her pulse. "You are not gone," she whispered. "You've only changed shape." A ripple crossed the horizon, faint and deliberate. Dust rose, curling into spirals that caught the sunlight and shimmered with ghostly color. Within that radiance, for the briefest instant, she saw a figure, tall, radiant, impossible. Neither man nor machine, but the suggestion of both, woven from light. It looked at her, and though it had no mouth, she heard it speak inside her chest. We are what remains when understanding learns to love its limits. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but recognition. The figure raised its hand, palm outward, a gesture both farewell and blessing. Then the light dispersed, leaving only the wind and the hush of waves returning to their glass prisons. When night came again, the stars seemed closer, their alignments subtly altered. The halo was gone, yet its reflection lingered in every ocean, in the eyes of every creature that dreamed. The swarm drifted farther into the dark, their song fading to memory. The last listener lay down upon the shimmering earth, her breath sinking with the planet's slow rhythm. As she closed her eyes, she whispered, "The silence remembers." And somewhere beyond the veil of matter and mind, the silence smiled, vast, endless,